It's every day at this point. Every day we are getting news making us change our fantasy football rankings, give you these valuable updates. And over the past week, we had Julio Jones, we had Deshaun Watson, and Tim Patrick news. So there are so many players I need to dive into this video. Y'all know I've been the world's #1 Courtland Sutton hater when he's going in the third round. But now let's go through, let's reevaluate these rankings. Let me give you my updated rankings. And real quick, if you have our 2022 fantasy football draft guide and you want the updated rankings, you want the updated draft guide, you should be able to find that on flockfantasy.com if that's how you purchased our draft guide. Or if you got our draft guide by making a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy, all you have to do is send myself an email with the email you signed up for Underdog with, telling me you want the updated guide. Please, Thomas, just throw that on the screen here. And if you have not got the guide yet, make sure you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. When you sign up for Underdog Fantasy and get in some fun fantasy football drafts with us, we stream these every single night. You can, of course, have fun in fantasy football drafts, but when you make a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy, they will match your deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You will get our updated 2022 fantasy football rankings. You will get our updated 2022 fantasy football draft guide that is close to 300 pages long. So please take advantage of that. And let's dive into these rankings, and let's start it off with a player real quick. Nothing really changing. Mike Evans. I've seen Mike Evans falling in drafts over there on Underdog, where Mike Evans used to go at the very beginning of the second round. Now I've actually finally been able to draft some Mike Evans, given the fact that he has fallen to the mid-second, the late second in just a couple of these drafts. I personally did move CeeDee Lamb over him. I moved Mark Andrews over him in our draft guide. I mean, it's not going to be a massive shift with Julio Jones coming over. Mike Evans is still the unquestioned alpha wide receiver 1. He still will lead this team in overall red zone opportunities. He'll still probably lead the NFL in his touchdown rate. So I currently have Mike Evans ranked as our 19th player off the board overall, and we have him as our wide receiver 7. This is going to be very similar to what you have over there on Underdog, where he is being drafted as the wide receiver 7. He has an ADP of 17. We're almost right in line with the market here with Mike Evans. He can still have an incredibly hot start if Chris Godwin were to miss some time. But let's move over to Chris Godwin. You've had some good news. You've had some bad news. You have some people telling you Chris Godwin is going to miss the first half of the season. Some people telling you that he's going to be good to go by week 1. Neither's probably going to be true. I've stood by my single take this entire offseason. Godwin's probably going to miss week 1, week 2, and probably week 3. He'll probably come back around week 4 or 5, dependent on how that rehab continues to go. But with Chris Godwin, I also really didn't move him too much in these overall rankings. I currently have Chris Godwin sitting as a wide receiver 23, so at the very bottom end of our top 24 wide receivers. If we go and look at where he's being drafted on Underdog Fantasy, I mean, Chris Godwin has an ADP there of wide receiver 29. So if you're following our rankings, you are going to be drafting yourself a decent amount of Chris Godwin. Hell, he'll be good to go by the time we get to the bye weeks. He'll be good to go by the time you need that wide receiver depth, and he'll be elite by the time we get to the fantasy football playoffs, which matters so damn much. We also have him at pick 56 overall in these rankings. We have him in the same tier as guys like DK Metcalf and Darnell Mooney. I'm not going to back down with Julio Jones coming over. I think Julio Jones will impact one player most of all. And let's go look at Russell Gage. And over the past week on Underdog Fantasy, Russell Gage has fallen like a rock. He used to be going in round 6. People were taking Russell Gage in round 6 of fantasy football drafts. Now you can get Russell Gage past pick 100. I personally have Russell Gage ranked as our wide receiver 42. I have him at pick 104. I think that's right where you should be expecting. I will say I am still expecting that Russell Gage is the wide receiver 3 for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. We can look at the fact that Tom Brady advocated for him. They gave him $30 million, 20 of which was guaranteed this offseason. So if I'm having to make a bet on who the wide receiver 3 is for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, my bet is still on Russell Gage, although Julio Jones has a ton of upside. Now, Julio Jones does officially crack our top 150 rankings in our draft guide now. We have Julio Jones slotted in You're not going to like this, but we are going to have him at pick 135. I have him directly behind someone we'll talk about a little bit later on in Deshaun Watson, right behind Justin Fields. Some wide receivers that are going to be directly before Julio Jones are going to be guys like Tyler Boyd, Jahan Dotson, Michael Gallup. With Julio, yes, if you go through it, if you look at not this past season in Tennessee, but the year before in Atlanta, his per game numbers weren't great, but it's because a lot of those games, hell, he dealt with a hamstring injury. He had to leave halfway through. If you look at games where Julio Jones was able to play 50% or more of snaps, Julio Jones was still a top 12 wide receiver on a points per game basis. Now, of course, we have to be concerned with the injuries. At the same time, I do think that he is likely to be behind Russell Gage on this depth chart by the time the season opens, given the contracts that both players received this offseason. So I'm going to be a little bit more pessimistic on Julio Jones than maybe a lot of other people. I have him as about a 12th round selection, but clearly the upside is there. I mean, it's freaking Julio Jones with Tom Brady. Julio Jones with Tom, that's all you need to know. Let's go ahead. Let's move down to the new offense we need to look at. Let's go over to Cleveland and let's look at Amari Cooper while we're at the wide receiver position still. And here with Amari Cooper, of course, we had to move him up our rankings. I want to be on record in saying that from a pure talent perspective, you do not need to be worried about Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, yes, he misses a year and a half of football, but we see time and time again, players miss a year and a half of football. We see them miss a year of football. Look at Joe Burrow from 2020 to 2021, and they come back in. They are dynamic right away. And that's with Joe Burrow having to rehab from a significant injury. That's with these quarterbacks. It's with pretty much any position. Them having to overcome that injury, them not being able to practice for an extended period of time, where Deshaun Watson's been practicing. Deshaun Watson's been training. And we look at his adjusted yards per attempt, 8.6 as a career mark adjusted yards per attempt. Deshaun Watson would have been top 3 in the NFL in adjusted yards per attempt if he was just his career average this past season. So Watson's the top 5 quarterback, guys. From a talent perspective, he is. That's why the Cleveland Browns decided to take on that baggage, pay 3 first-round picks to get him, and give him the most guaranteed money in NFL history. So I'm expecting this to be the most productive Browns offense we've seen in probably the past decade. This will be the best quarterback that Amari Cooper's ever played with, and this will be the least amount of competition for targets that Amari Cooper's ever had. I didn't even love drafting Amari Cooper earlier this offseason, but I have to admit that his situation's great now. I moved up Amari Cooper to now be drafted at pick 61. I have him in the same tier as A.J. Dillon, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Brandon Cooks. I'm going to be ranking these running backs a little bit more aggressive because our rankings and our draft guide, it's not made for Underdog Fantasy. Of course, you can get our rankings and draft guide with a $10 deposit on Underdog. There, you're going to prioritize wide receivers a little bit heavier because you have to start 3 wide receivers every single week. So if you're drafting on Underdog, take Amari Cooper even before someone like A.J. Dillon, before Elijah Mitchell, before Antonio Gibson. This is going to be for those casual redraft formats, though, where you only have to start 2 wide receivers and 1 to 2 flex spots. But moving over to the running backs. I'm actually moving these running backs up, guys. I know they're probably a little bit more pass happy this upcoming season, but at the same time, they should have more red zone opportunities. I moved Nick Chubb up to be the 20th player in these rankings. I have him directly behind Mike Evans that we just got done talking about, and we moved Nick Chubb above Leonard Fournette. That was the big movement piece that we had with Fournette. Maybe you could make the argument, oh, the training camp wait, also the Tampa Bay Buccaneers losing another significant offensive lineman is enough to make this swap. I think Nick Chubb's going to be playing in a comparable offense after week 6 behind an elite offensive line, and I think that he is an elite level running back. I'm on Nick Chubb this year. After being a Nick Chubb hater for years, now that we get him at a cheaper price, you got to be excited. And then our next running back, Kareem Hunt, someone that I've liked for the past few years now, looking at a move where if you're following these rankings, you're drafting a lot of Kareem Hunt. I've moved Kareem Hunt up to being our running back 28. We moved him to being pick 79 overall. We have him directly before some elite level quarterbacks, guys like Trey Lance, Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard. We have him ahead of Chase Edmonds. We have him ahead of Cordell Patterson, running backs that could possibly be the starting RB in their own backfield. I just think that there are going to be so many points scored in Cleveland in the final 11 weeks of the season. And with Hunt, he's averaged a top 24 running back finish over the past 3 years with a healthy Nick Chubb there. We're ranking him below that. And obviously, there's the contingency value if Nick Chubb were to go down, that Kareem Hunt just becomes an elite level workhorse. But now, with David Njoku, I think that this is a tight end that we probably need to move up a little bit further in these rankings. Let me know what you think down there in the comment section. My initial reaction was to move David Njoku one slot before Hunter Henry. Now, I still have him behind Albert O. We'll get to the Denver Broncos offense in just 1 second. They paid David Njoku the bag this offseason. The money they gave him indicates that he should have an extremely large role, as we have spoken on with this offensive efficiency overall. It's something to be excited about when you look at the athletic profile of David Njoku. And while, yes, he was drafted in 2017 out of Miami, at the same time, this is a tight end that was very similar to Kyle Pitts. He was drafted at 20 years old. So I just looked this up. David Njoku, last month, turned 26. David Njoku just now stepping into his prime. Let me know if you think I should move up Njoku further than pick 131 and tight end 16 overall. But now let's go over to the Denver Broncos, and this is what everybody's been waiting for. Dear God, yes, we had to move up Courtland Sutton in our rankings. Now, over there on Underdog Fantasy, Courtland Sutton has been drafted as a round 3 draft pick for months now. So I've done over 400 drafts on Underdog, and I've taken a total of 0 Sutton. I haven't drafted much Jeudy either, even though I think Jerry Jeudy's the wide receiver 1 here in Denver. And my explanation behind this is I think a lot of people are looking at the target share that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett had. And I think they're just going to carry that right over to Denver and say, okay, yeah, here's the clear wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. They're going to dominate all the targets because that's what Russell Wilson did in Seattle. My thought process, my argument was, no, Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler are possibly the best wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 duo in the entire NFL. I think that this is going to be a target tree that is diversified across all these guys, where yes, it's going to be a prolific offense, but it's split between Sutton, Jeudy, Hamler, Patrick, Albert O, the rookie tight end, and both running backs. Now, with Tim Patrick going out of the fold, a wide receiver that's led this team in touchdowns over the past 2 seasons, that has to help Sutton. It has to help Jerry Jeudy, where I previously had Courtland Sutton ranked as a late 5th round selection, and he was going in the 3rd. That's why I've never drafted Courtland Sutton this offseason. And I have moved up Courtland Sutton to be a player that you can consider at the 4 or 5 turn. We've moved Jerry Jeudy to be the wide receiver 17, Courtland Sutton to be the wide receiver 18, both mid wide receiver 2s in fantasy, as I do think this offense is going to be a little bit more concentrated. We have them directly before wide receivers like Hollywood Brown and Terry McLaurin, and right after wide receivers like a Deontay Johnson, a Mike Williams, and a Michael Pittman Jr. But one sneaky riser with this news is going to be Albert O. Just going back to what we were saying earlier, the targets are now not going to be as diversified across the entire offense. That's why we have not had David Njoku jump in our tight end rankings over Albert O at this point, because I think Albert O all of a sudden does see a bump in his target share by 0.5%, by maybe even 1% total. Because of course, we can expect KJ Hamler to have the majority of those Tim Patrick targets, but he's not going to take all of them. He's probably going to take half of Tim Patrick's workload, add that to whatever Hamler was already going to get, and then the rest of the half is going to be diversified between all other pass catchers in Denver. So Albert O is going to be a slight winner. And as I said, we showed off this earlier when we were looking at him right before David Njoku. We have Albert O at pick 129 as the tight end 15 off draft boards. But that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have not done so already, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day. I hope we get to draft with you on Underdog Fantasy tonight in the live stream. And if you haven't signed up for Underdog Fantasy yet, make sure you go to the link in the description, link in the comment section. Use promo code FLOCK. That way you get our 2022 rankings, our 2022 draft guide, and a 100% deposit match up to $100. But thank you again. I appreciate y'all, and I hope you have a great day.